Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Detective Raymond Ray Morrison had seen enough broken families in his 15 years on the force to know that monsters often wore familiar faces. But he never expected to find one sleeping beside him every night. At 38, Ray was a man carved from granite and bitter experience. His angular jaw bore a scar from a knife fight with a meth dealer 3 years prior, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. Colleagues respected his methodical approach to cases and his reputation for never letting criminals slip through procedural cracks. What they didn't know was that Ray's obsession with justice stemmed from his own childhood, watching his alcoholic father abuse his mother until the bastard finally drank himself to death. Ray had built his life on control and order. His house in the suburbs was immaculate, his finances precise, his career trajectory planned to the year. When he met Lila Hensley at a charity fundraiser 5 years ago, she seemed to fit perfectly into his structured world. She was a pediatric nurse with warm brown eyes and a gentle laugh that made him believe in softness again. Lila was 28 then, fresh from a messy divorce with a deadbeat musician. She spoke of wanting stability, a real family, someone reliable. Ray thought he was saving her. Now, as he stood in his kitchen reviewing case files at 6 a.m., he wondered who had really been the prey. Their daughter Emma had been the brightest light in Ray's carefully constructed life. At 2 years old, she had Lila's brown eyes but Ray's stubborn chin. She would toddle after him when he came home from work, babbling "dada" and reaching up with tiny arms. For the first time since childhood, Ray felt something approaching peace. But lately, something had shifted in his house like a fault line preparing to rupture. Lila had grown distant over the past 6 months, taking extra shifts at the hospital, whispering into her phone in the bathroom, claiming exhaustion when Ray reached for her at night. She'd started going to book club every Wednesday, though Ray had never seen her crack a novel. When he'd casually mentioned checking the book she was supposedly reading, Lila had snapped at him with uncharacteristic venom. Ray's detective instincts were screaming, but he'd pushed them down. This was his wife, his family, the thing he'd built to replace the chaos of his childhood. He couldn't let paranoia destroy it. That morning, as Lila rushed around the kitchen preparing for another early shift, Ray studied her profile. She was still beautiful. Auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, scrubs that couldn't hide her curves, but there was a tension in her movements that hadn't been there before. "I might be late tonight," she said without looking at him. "Dr. Gutierrez asked me to cover the evening shift in pediatric ICU. Ray nodded, filing away the information. Dr. Gutierrez was 63 years old with a wife and grandchildren. Not exactly affair material, but someone was. "I'll pick up Emma from daycare then," he said. Lila's hand paused on her coffee mug. "Actually, I already arranged for my mom to get her. I might need to work really late." Another lie. Lila's mother was in Phoenix, visiting her sister. Ray had seen the Facebook photos yesterday, but he simply nodded and kissed Lila's cheek, tasting the deception on her skin. After she left, Ray sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by crime scene photos from his latest case. A domestic violence murder where the husband had beaten his wife to death with a tire iron. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years putting monsters in cages, never realizing he'd invited one into his bed. Chapter 2, Fractures in Paradise. Dr. Travis Kellerman had always been good at reading people's vulnerabilities. At 35, he possessed the kind of easy charm that made patients trust him and nurses linger near his desk. Tall and lean with practiced stubble and expressive green eyes, he knew exactly how handsome he was and wielded it like a surgical instrument. Travis specialized in pediatric emergency medicine at St. Mary's Hospital, where his reputation for saving children's lives made him untouchable. What his colleagues didn't know was that Travis saw children as opportunities rather than patients. Not in the way the hospital's background checks were designed to catch. He wasn't a predator in that sense. But he understood that desperate parents would do anything for their sick children, and desperate women were his specialty. He'd been seducing married nurses for years, always choosing women with something to lose. The game wasn't just about sex. It was about power, about proving he could dismantle any life he chose. Lila Morrison had been his greatest challenge yet. When Lila first started working pediatric ICU 6 months ago, Travis had immediately spotted her tells. The wedding ring she twisted when nervous, the way she flinched when other nurses mentioned their husbands' jobs, the careful distance she maintained from male colleagues. She was armor-plated against men like him, which only made her more irresistible. The campaign had taken weeks of careful groundwork. First, he'd established himself as safe, seeking her opinion on difficult cases, praising her competence to supervisors, never crossing professional boundaries. When her daughter Emma had come to the ER with a high fever one evening, Travis had personally overseen her care, staying late to ensure everything was perfect. Lila's gratitude had cracked the first fissure in her defenses. The real breakthrough came when Travis mentioned his own difficult divorce and how hard it was to trust again. A complete fabrication. He'd never been married, but Lila had responded with her own story of disappointment and fear of being controlled. Travis had listened with practiced empathy, offering just enough vulnerability to make her feel safe while gathering intelligence on her marriage. Now, as he prepared for another Wednesday evening with Lila, Travis felt the familiar thrill of approaching victory. She was completely under his spell, believing herself to be in love with a man who didn't exist. Tonight, he planned to escalate things, to push her toward leaving her husband entirely. The irony was delicious. Ray Morrison, the celebrated detective who'd sent dozens of criminals to prison, couldn't even see the one dismantling his life from the inside. Travis had researched Ray extensively, reading news articles about his cases, studying his reputation for ruthless efficiency. The man was dangerous when pursuing criminals, but apparently blind to threats in his own home. Most men were, in Travis's experience. They built their lives around assumptions of loyalty and love, never realizing these were just tools to be exploited. That evening, Travis waited in the parking lot of the Riverside Hotel, watching Lila's car pull into the space beside his BMW. She told Ray she was working late again. The lies came easier now, each deception making the next one smoother. As Lila approached his car, Travis noted the guilt still etched in her features. Good. Guilt made women malleable, desperate to prove their feelings were justified. He planned to use that guilt to his advantage tonight. "You look beautiful," he said as she slipped into his passenger seat, leaning over to kiss her neck. Lila melted into his touch, and Travis smiled against her skin. Soon, she'd be willing to do anything for him, even abandon her daughter if necessary. Because that was the real game Travis was playing, not just seducing another man's wife, but destroying an entire family. Ray Morrison's reputation for putting criminals behind bars made him a particularly satisfying target. Travis wondered how the detective would handle being the victim for once. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Ray Morrison wasn't a man who believed in coincidences. 20 years of police work had taught him that patterns revealed truth, and the pattern emerging around his wife was growing impossible to ignore. He'd started documenting Lila's behavior 3 weeks ago, not because he wanted to, but because his instincts demanded it. The same methodical approach that made him an excellent detective now turned inward, dissecting his own life with surgical precision. The evidence was damning. 12 late shifts that weren't on the hospital staff schedule. Credit card charges at restaurants she claimed never to have visited. A new lingerie set hidden in the back of her drawer that she'd never worn for him. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. But Ray was a careful man. He needed proof, not suspicion. So he begun following her. The first Wednesday, he'd watched Lila's Honda Civic pull into the Riverside Hotel parking lot. She'd sat there for 10 minutes before a silver BMW pulled up beside her. Ray had used his telephoto lens to photograph the license plate and a man who emerged, tall, dark-haired, expensive clothes. A quick DMV search revealed Dr. Travis Kellerman, unmarried, no criminal record. The second Wednesday, Ray had booked a room 3 floors above theirs and confirmed what he already knew in his gut. His wife was fucking another man. But knowledge wasn't enough. Ray needed leverage. Tonight was the third Wednesday, and Ray had prepared meticulously. He'd installed tracking software on Lila's phone weeks ago, a trick learned from domestic violence cases where victims needed evidence of stalking. Now he had copies of every text message, every deleted photo, every whispered phone call. The messages revealed more than just adultery. They showed Travis Kellerman's true nature, his manipulation, his cruelty, his obvious contempt for both Lila and Emma. In one particularly vicious exchange, Travis had called Emma a burden and suggested Lila would need to choose between her daughter and their future together. That message had changed everything for Ray. This wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. This was about a predator who threatened his child. As Ray sat in his surveillance van watching the hotel, his phone buzzed with a text from the department. Another domestic violence case, a mother who'd accidentally broken her 3-year-old's arm. Ray stared at the message, something cold crystallizing in his chest. Children were sacred. Anyone who threatened them deserved no mercy. At 9:47 p.m., Lila emerged from the hotel looking disheveled and guilty. Travis kissed her goodbye with the casual possessiveness of a man who thought he'd already won. Ray followed Lila home, arriving a few minutes after her. She was in the shower when he entered, washing away the evidence of her betrayal. He checked on Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and felt his resolve harden into something diamond-sharp. When Lila emerged from the bathroom in her robe, Ray was sitting on their bed, apparently reading case files. "How was work?" he asked without looking up. "Exhausting," she replied, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "Lost a patient tonight. 8-year-old car accident victim." Ray nodded sympathetically, making a mental note. There had been no pediatric deaths at St. Mary's in 3 weeks. He checked. Even her cover stories were fabrications now. "I'm sorry, baby," he said, pulling her close. She stiffened slightly at his touch, and Ray felt the last piece of his heart turn to ice. "Why don't you get some sleep? You look tired." As Lila settled beside him, Ray lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about the domestic violence cases he'd worked, the patterns of escalation, the moment when victims realized their lives were in danger. But Ray wasn't a victim. He was a predator who'd been sleeping, and his wife had just awakened something far more dangerous than she could imagine. Tomorrow, he would begin planning their destruction. Not just Lila and Travis, but everyone who had enabled this betrayal. By the time Ray Morrison was finished, they would understand what it meant to threaten his daughter. Justice, Ray had learned long ago, wasn't always legal. Sometimes it was personal. Chapter 4, The Catalyst. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos when Ray Morrison burst through the doors carrying his unconscious 2-year-old daughter. Emma's lips were blue, her breathing shallow and labored. Ray's training took over even as panic clawed at his throat. Protect the child, secure the scene, find the truth. "I need help," he shouted, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. "My daughter can't breathe." Nurses swarmed them immediately, transferring Emma to a gurney as they rushed toward the trauma bay. Ray kept pace beside them, his detective's mind cataloging every detail while his father's heart screamed. "What happened?" Dr. Susan Chun asked as they worked, inserting in 4 and attaching monitors. "I came home and found her like this," Ray said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "My wife said she fell, but..." The monitors started beeping frantically. Emma's oxygen levels were dangerously low. "Get respiratory therapy down here now," Dr. Chen ordered. "And page Dr. Kellerman. We need pediatric emergency." Ray's blood turned to ice. Travis Kellerman, the man fucking his wife, was about to put his hands on his dying daughter. As if summoned by Ray's darkest thoughts, Travis appeared in the doorway. For a split second, their eyes met, and Ray saw something flicker across the doctor's face, surprise, perhaps even guilt, before professional composure took over. "What do we have?" Travis asked, moving to Emma's bedside with practiced efficiency. 2-year-old female, respiratory distress, possible aspiration, Dr. Chen reported. Travis began his examination, and Ray had to admit the bastard was competent. His hands were gentle but sure as he checked Emma's airways, listened to her breathing, ordered additional tests. Whatever else Travis was, he seemed genuinely concerned about Emma's condition. But then Lila arrived. Ray heard her voice in the hallway before he saw her. That particular pitch of panic every parent recognized. She rushed into the trauma bay, her face white with terror, and immediately went to Emma's side. "Oh God, my baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Is she going to be okay?" It was then that Ray noticed Nurse Patricia Williams. The older woman stood frozen near the supply cabinet, her face drained of color as she stared at Lila. Her hands were trembling so violently she nearly dropped the medication she was holding. "Patricia," Dr. Chun called out. "Are you all right?" The nurse looked up, startled, and her eyes darted between Lila and the exit as if calculating escape routes. I'm fine. Just tired." But Ray wasn't buying it. He'd seen that look before, in witnesses who'd recognized suspects, in victims confronting their attackers. Patricia Williams was terrified of his wife. Why is she here?" Patricia whispered to another nurse. Her voice barely audible, but Ray's trained ears caught every word. The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. Patricia's terror, Emma's mysterious injuries over the past months that Lila had explained away, the timing of his wife's affair. Ray felt his vision narrow to a tunnel as rage built in his chest like molten steel. "Dr. Kellerman," Ray said, his voice deadly calm, "I need to speak with you privately." Travis looked up from Emma's chart, wariness flickering in his eyes. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter needs." "Now," Ray interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. They stepped into the hallway, and Ray used every ounce of his self-control not to slam Travis against the wall. Instead, he spoke in the same measured tone he used when interrogating suspects. "How long have you been fucking my wife?" Travis's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." 6 months, Ray continued as if Travis hadn't spoken. "Every Wednesday at the Riverside Hotel, room 237. You drive a silver BMW, license plate 4HRT 891. You told her Emma was a burden and she'd have to choose between her daughter and you." The color drained from Travis's face. "You're obviously distraught." "What I am," Ray said, stepping closer, "is a man who's discovered his wife is fucking a predator, and that same predator is now treating his daughter. So I'm going to ask you one more time. What do you know about Emma's injuries?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun, because Ray had realized something that made his blood run cold. Travis's medical expertise would make him the perfect accomplice for someone hurting a child. He would know exactly what injuries would look accidental, what symptoms would be dismissed, how to cover up abuse. Travis opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was about to say was cut off by alarms from Emma's room. They rushed back to find her breathing had worsened. "We need to intubate," Travis said, all pretense of personal drama forgotten in the face of medical crisis. "Give me a size 3 ET tube." As they worked to save Emma's life, Ray stood back and watched his wife. Really watched her. The tears seemed genuine, but there was something else in her expression, a calculation behind the grief that made his stomach turn. When Emma was finally stabilized and breathing steadily with the ventilator's help, Ray made a decision that would change everything. He was going to destroy them all. Chapter 5. Uncovering the Truth. Ray Morrison spent the next 48 hours in a state of controlled fury, maintaining the facade of a worried father while conducting the most important investigation of his career. Emma remained in pediatric ICU, sedated and stable, but not yet out of danger. The doctors, led by Travis, ironically, had determined she'd suffered severe respiratory distress due to what appeared to be allergic reaction or possible poisoning. But Ray knew better. He'd seen the needle mark on Emma's arm that the medical staff had dismissed as an for insertion point. The location was wrong, the angle inconsistent with medical procedure. Someone had injected his daughter with something, and Ray had a growing suspicion about who. While Lila maintained her vigil at Emma's bedside, playing the part of the devoted mother, Ray worked his contacts throughout the hospital. 20 years of police work had taught him that institutions were only as strong as their weakest links, and every workplace had employees willing to talk. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Miguel Santos, a janitor who worked the night shift in pediatric ICU. Miguel was undocumented, which made him invisible to most staff, but also meant he noticed everything. His survival depended on it. That nurse, the one with the red hair, Miguel said when Ray cornered him in the supply closet, she comes in sometimes when she's not scheduled. Late at night, when there's only skeleton crew. Lila Morrison? Ray showed him a photo. Miguel nodded. She has access codes, so security doesn't stop her. But I seen her go into rooms when families aren't there. Sometimes she brings things in her purse, little bottles, syringes. Ray felt his world tilt. You saw her inject patients? Not patients, Miguel said, his eyes dark with worry. The 4 bags. She puts something in the 4 bags, then hangs them back up. Next morning, kids get sicker. The janitor pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I started recording because I was scared for the children. My own grandson was patient here last month. The video was grainy but clear enough. Lila, dressed in scrubs, entering room 314 at 2:17 a.m. She approached the 4 stand, withdrew a small vial from her purse, and injected its contents into the saline bag. The timestamp showed this was 3 weeks ago, a night when Lila had told Ray she was working a double shift. What happened to the patient in that room? Ray asked, though he dreaded the answer. Little boy, 5 years old, came in for routine surgery. Developed complications that night, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest. They saved him, but Miguel shrugged helplessly. He's still in coma. Ray's hands clenched into fists. His wife wasn't just an adulteress. She was a serial child abuser. Worse, she was doing it under the guise of medical care, using her position as a nurse to harm the most vulnerable patients. But why? And how did Travis fit into this? The answer came from another source. Hospital records that Ray obtained through unofficial channels. Cross-referencing Lila's work schedule with patient complications revealed a pattern spanning 4 months. Every child who'd suffered mysterious setbacks had been under Lila's care during night shifts. But more tellingly, Travis had been the attending physician for every single case. Munchausen syndrome by proxy, Ray realized with sickening clarity. Lila was making children sick, and Travis was heroically saving them. The medical staff saw Dr. Kellerman as a miracle worker, the man who could save patients when all hope seemed lost. It built his reputation while feeding Lila's need for attention and drama. The affair was just a bonus, 2 psychopaths who'd found each other. But Emma's case was different. This wasn't about medical attention or playing hero. This was personal. They'd used his daughter as a test case, probably to see if they could manipulate him the way they manipulated other families. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from Lila, heading home to shower and get clothes. Back in an hour. Thank God Travis is taking such good care of Emma. The irony made him want to vomit. Instead, Ray made his way to Patricia Williams' station. The older nurse had been avoiding him since that first night, but now he understood why. She knew something about Lila's activities, but was too scared to speak up. We need to talk, Ray said, cornering Patricia near the medication lockup. She flinched away from him. I can't. I need to get back to work. Patricia. Ray's voice carried the authority of 15 years carrying a badge. Children are dying. Emma almost died. If you know something, you have a moral obligation to speak. The older woman's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked around to ensure they weren't overheard. I suspected for weeks, she whispered. Little things at first, medications going missing for bags that looked tampered with. Then I started noticing the pattern with Lila's patients. But who was going to believe me? She's married to a detective, and Dr. Kellerman vouches for her. What about Emma specifically? Patricia's face crumpled. I saw Lila in your daughter's room an hour before you arrived. She wasn't supposed to be working that floor, but she said she was checking on the new admission. When I came back 20 minutes later, Emma was in distress. The final piece clicked into place. Lila had deliberately poisoned their daughter, knowing Ray would bring her to the hospital where Travis could play the hero. It was the ultimate test of their control. Could they manipulate even a police detective? They were about to find out just how badly they'd miscalculated. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. Ray Morrison sat in his car outside St. Mary's Hospital at 3 a.m., watching the building where his daughter fought for her life and his wife played out her twisted games. Emma was stable now, breathing on her own, but the doctors warned there could be lasting damage from whatever toxin had nearly killed her. In the passenger seat lay 3 manila folders, one containing Miguel's video evidence, another with Patricia Williams' signed statement, and the third holding Ray's own surveillance documentation of Lila and Travis's affair. Enough evidence to destroy both their careers and send them to prison for child endangerment, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges. But Ray wasn't thinking about legal justice anymore. He'd spent 20 years putting criminals behind bars, watching them serve reduced sentences, get parole, sometimes walk free on technicalities. He'd seen victims' families destroyed by a system that prioritized rehabilitation over retribution. His own daughter had become a victim of that same broken system, because he'd trusted it to protect the innocent while monsters wore scrubs and white coats. No more. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from Travis. Emma's responding well to treatment. You can rest easy knowing she's in good hands. The audacity was breathtaking. The man who'd helped poison his daughter was now playing concerned physician, probably getting off on Ray's gratitude and relief. Another text, this one from Lila, staying at hospital tonight to be close to Emma. Travis is being so wonderful. We're lucky to have him. Lucky indeed. Ray started his car and drove home to their empty house. He had work to do, and the clock was ticking. Lila would be back tomorrow morning to shower and change clothes. Travis would continue his rounds, basking in praise for his heroic efforts to save Emma. They both thought they'd won. In his basement, Ray opened a storage locker he hadn't touched in 5 years. Inside were tools from his military days. Before he'd become a cop, he'd been special forces for 8 years. Some skills never faded, and some equipment never became obsolete. The plan that formed in his mind was elegant in its brutality. Ray had learned from watching too many criminals make the same mistake. They let emotion drive their actions, becoming sloppy and desperate. He wouldn't make that error. This would be methodical, precise, and absolutely devastating. But first, he needed to ensure Emma's safety. As long as she remained in the hospital under Travis and Lila's care, she was vulnerable. Ray made a series of calls to colleagues, pulling in favors from his years on the force. By dawn, Emma had been quietly transferred to Children's Hospital across town under the care of Dr. Sarah Martinez, a pediatric specialist Ray had met during previous cases. The transfer was presented as a consultation for Emma's unusual symptoms, but Ray had been explicit about his concerns regarding the staff at St. Mary's. You're saying you suspect medical abuse? Dr. Martinez had asked during their phone call. I'm saying my daughter nearly died under suspicious circumstances, and I want her somewhere safe while I investigate, Ray had replied. It wasn't quite the truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. With Emma secure, Ray returned to St. Mary's to watch his target's reactions. He arrived just as Lila was rushing through the ICU doors, panic written across her face. Where is she? She demanded at the nurse's station. Where's Emma? Mrs. Morrison, the charge nurse, said calmly. Your daughter was transferred for specialized care. Your husband authorized it. Transferred where? Lila's voice was rising, drawing attention from other families in the waiting area. Ray stepped out from behind a pillar. Children's Hospital. I wanted a second opinion on her condition. Relief flooded Lila's face so quickly that Ray almost missed the flash of something else. Fury, maybe, or frustration. Why didn't you tell me? I was terrified something had happened. It was a last-minute decision, Ray said, watching her carefully. Dr. Martinez wanted to run some specialized tests that aren't available here. I should have been consulted, Lila said, her anger now barely contained. I'm her mother, and I'm her father, Ray replied, his tone absolutely neutral. The father who found her dying in our living room while her mother stood by and did nothing. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Lila's face went white, then red with indignation. How dare you? Mrs. Morrison. Travis appeared beside them, his voice smooth and professional. I understand you're upset about Emma's transfer, but Children's Hospital has excellent facilities. I'm sure she'll receive wonderful care. Ray studied Travis's expression, noting the micro-expressions that betrayed his true feelings. The doctor was furious about losing control of Emma's case, but he was hiding it behind Concerned Physician Act. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Travis continued, glancing meaningfully at Lila. "Good idea," Ray said. "Why don't you both come to my house tonight? We can discuss Emma's care properly. Say around 9 o'clock. Lila and Travis exchanged glances, a look so loaded with communication that Ray almost laughed at their transparency. "I'm not sure Travis began. "I insist," Ray interrupted, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear this wasn't a request. "After all, you've both been so invested in Emma's well-being. The least I can do is make you dinner." As Ray walked away, he could feel their eyes boring into his back. They were probably wondering if he suspected something, if the transfer was random or deliberate, if they were in danger. They had no idea how right they were to be afraid. Tonight, Ray Morrison would begin evening the score. And by the time he was finished, Travis Kellerman and Lila Morrison would understand that some fathers couldn't be manipulated, threatened, or broken. Some fathers were apex predators who'd been sleeping. Until now. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. The Morrison house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors minded their own business and thick oak trees provided natural privacy. Ray had chosen this location deliberately when he and Lila married. A detective's paranoia demanded secure surroundings. Tonight, that same paranoia would serve a darker purpose. At 8:45 p.m., Ray finished his preparations. The living room looked exactly as it had the night Emma nearly died, but appearances were deceiving. Hidden cameras captured every angle, and recording devices ensured nothing would be missed. In the kitchen, 3 wine glasses sat on the counter beside an expensive bottle of Cabernet. One glass treated with a carefully measured dose of Rohypnol, another with a paralytic agent Ray had acquired through military contacts, and a third completely clean for himself. Ray checked his watch, 8:55. They would arrive precisely on time, because punctuality was Travis's way of maintaining control in social situations. The doctor couldn't resist demonstrating his superiority through perfect manners and careful preparation. Headlights swept across the front windows as a silver BMW pulled into the driveway. Ray adjusted his hidden recording device and opened the door with a warm smile. "Travis, Lila," he said, embracing his wife and shaking hands with her lover. "Thank you for coming. I know this has been a difficult time for all of us." Travis was dressed in expensive casual wear, designer jeans, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Lila wore a blue dress Ray had bought her for their anniversary last year. The irony wasn't lost on him. "How's Emma doing?" Lila asked as they settled in the living room. "Better," Ray replied, pouring wine with steady hands. "Dr. Martinez thinks she'll make a full recovery, though she's still running tests to determine what caused the respiratory distress." He handed Lila the glass treated with Rohypnol, not enough to cause serious harm, but sufficient to make her compliant and confused. Travis received the paralytic, a drug that would leave him conscious but unable to move. Ray kept the clean glass for himself. "To Emma's recovery," Ray said, raising his glass. They drank, and Ray felt a cold satisfaction as he watched his enemies consume their own destruction. The drugs would take 15 to 20 minutes to reach full effect. Plenty of time for the conversation Ray had planned. "Travis," Ray said conversationally, "how long have you been a pediatric emergency physician?" 8 years, Travis replied, settling back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man discussing his greatest passion. "I love working with children. They're so resilient, so trusting." "Trusting," Ray repeated, tasting the word. "That's interesting. Do you think that trust ever gets misplaced?" Something flickered in Travis's eyes, but his smile remained steady. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Well," Ray continued, "parents trust medical professionals with their children's lives. They believe doctors and nurses want to help, not harm. But what if that trust was misplaced? What if the people supposedly saving children were actually hurting them?" Lila shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "The Rohypnol," was beginning to affect her balance and judgment, making her less capable of maintaining the careful facades she'd worn for months. "Ray," she said, her voice slightly slurred, "what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about patterns, sweetheart," Ray replied, his tone remaining conversational despite the steel underneath. "For instance, the pattern of children under your care developing mysterious complications during night shifts. Or the pattern of Dr. Kellerman heroically saving those same children, building his reputation as a miracle worker." Travis set down his wine glass, and Ray noticed the slight tremor in his hand. The paralytic was starting to work. "That's quite an accusation," Travis said, trying to maintain his composed demeanor even as his body began betraying him. "I think grief over Emma's condition might be affecting your judgment." "My judgment is perfectly clear," Ray said. "Would you like to see the evidence?" He reached for the first manila folder, spreading crime scene photos across the coffee table. Not photos of Lila and Travis's medical crimes, photos from Ray's current caseload. Images of child abuse, domestic violence, murder scenes. 20 years of police work teaches you to recognize patterns, Ray said as his guest stared at the horrific images. "These are all cases I've worked recently. Parents who hurt their own children. Caregivers who exploited the vulnerable. Medical professionals who used their positions to abuse patients." Lila was now visibly struggling to focus, the drug making her disoriented and vulnerable. Travis remained alert, but Ray could see panic in his eyes as he realized his limbs weren't responding properly. "The justice system failed every one of these victims," Ray continued, his voice taking on a darker edge. "Reduced sentences, plea bargains, technicalities that let monsters walk free. But tonight, we're going to discuss a different kind of justice." He stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a black duffel bag that he placed on the floor between his paralyzed guests. "Travis," Ray said, unzipping the bag to reveal an array of medical instruments, scalpels, syringes, bone saws, other tools that gleamed under the living room lights. "Since you're so fond of medical procedures, I thought you might appreciate these. Military field surgery equipment. Very effective for various purposes." Travis tried to speak, but found his vocal cords increasingly unresponsive. Only his eyes remained fully functional, and they were wide with terror as he began to understand his situation. "Lila," Ray continued, "you've always been fascinated by the effects of different drugs on the human body. Tonight, you got to experience that fascination from a new perspective." Ray pulled out a vial of clear liquid and a syringe, checking the dosage with professional precision. "This is succinylcholine, a paralytic agent that will leave you completely conscious while your body shuts down. It's the same drug you used on Emma. Actually, I thought it was appropriately poetic." The full horror of their situation was finally penetrating their drug-clouded minds. They were trapped in the home of a man they betrayed, poisoned and helpless, facing someone who knew exactly how to cause maximum pain while keeping them alive. Ray had spent 20 years studying the darkest aspects of human nature. Tonight, he was going to demonstrate everything he'd learned. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Ray Morrison moved with the methodical precision of a surgeon as he prepared his instruments, each tool laid out with the same care he'd once used to organize evidence at crime scenes. Travis and Lila sat paralyzed in their chairs, conscious but helpless, watching their executioner work with growing terror. "The beauty of succinylcholine," Ray said conversationally as he filled another syringe, "is that it mimics natural death. Respiratory failure, cardiac arrest, very difficult to detect in post-mortem examination unless you know what to look for." He injected Lila first, watching as the remaining mobility left her body. She could still breathe, still think, still feel everything, but she couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't escape. Travis received the same treatment, his eyes tracking Ray's movements with desperate intensity. Both of them understood now that this wasn't an interrogation or a confrontation. This was an execution disguised as medical procedure. "I want you to understand something," Ray said, settling into a chair across from them. "This isn't about the affair. I stopped caring about your pathetic relationship weeks ago. This is about Emma. He pulled out his laptop and opened the video files he'd compiled: Miguel's surveillance footage, hospital records, recorded phone conversations. "Did you really think you could poison my daughter and get away with it?" Ray asked, turning the screen so they could see the evidence of their crimes. "Did you think I was just another grieving father you could manipulate?" On the screen, Lila could see herself injecting substances into 4 bags, tampering with medications, creating the very emergencies that Travis would then heroically resolve. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. 17 children, Ray continued, his voice growing colder. 17 innocent children you poisoned, tortured, traumatized for your sick games. Some of them suffered permanent damage. The 5-year-old boy you put in a coma is still fighting for his life. Ray stood and moved to his surgical table, selecting a scalpel with the same care other men chose golf clubs. "Military field surgery teaches you interesting things about human anatomy," he said, testing the blade's sharpness against his thumb. "How much pain a body can endure while remaining conscious. How to keep someone alive through procedures that should kill them. How to make death take hours instead of minutes." The terror in their eyes was absolute now. They'd played games with children's lives, never considering that someone might play the same games with theirs. Ray began with Travis's fingers, precise cuts that severed tendons without hitting major arteries. The doctor's surgical hands, which had saved lives and destroyed them in equal measure, were methodically rendered useless. Travis couldn't scream, couldn't move, could only watch his career and his identity being dismantled one cut at a time. "Each finger represents a child you hurt," Ray explained clinically. "This little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home." Lila was forced to watch every moment, her own terror building as she realized her turn was coming. The Rohypnol had worn off enough for her to think clearly, but the paralytic kept her trapped in her own body. When Ray finished with Travis's hands, he moved to Lila. But his approach with her was different, more personal, more intimate in its cruelty. "You used to beg me to have another baby," Ray said, producing a different set of instruments. "You said Emma needed a sibling, that you wanted to give me more children. But the whole time, you were planning to hurt the daughter we already had." The gynecological tools Ray had acquired were designed for precision surgery, but in his hands they became instruments of poetic justice. Each cut, each procedure was carefully calculated to cause maximum psychological damage, along with the physical trauma. "This is for every night you came home from hurting children and kissed them a goodnight," Ray said as he worked. "For every time you pretended to be a loving mother while planning her suffering." Hours passed. Ray worked with professional efficiency, keeping his victims conscious and aware throughout their ordeal. He'd studied the human breaking point extensively through his police work, knew exactly how much trauma a person could endure before shock set in. But Ray wasn't interested in mere death. He wanted confession, admission, acknowledgement of their crimes. "Tell me about the others," he said during one of his breaks, offering water to keep them hydrated enough to continue. "The children before Emma. How many hospitals? How many victims?" Travis's eyes held a plea for mercy that would never come. Lila's expression had moved beyond terror into something approaching madness. "I have all night," Ray continued, cleaning his instruments with antiseptic precision. "Actually, I have all weekend. Took vacation time from the department." Amazing how understanding they are when your child almost dies. As dawn approached, Ray made his final preparations. Both his victims were beyond pain now, existing in a twilight state between life and death. But they were still conscious, still aware of what was happening to them. "Any last words?" Ray asked, temporarily reversing the vocal paralysis with a carefully measured injection. Travis tried to speak, but could only produce a liquid wheeze. Too much damage to his throat from the night's work. Lila managed 2 words: "Please stop." Ray smiled for the first time since Emma's poisoning. "Did Emma say those words when you hurt her? Did any of the children you tortured beg you to stop?" He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he prepared the final injections, massive doses of potassium chloride that would stop their hearts within minutes. "Goodbye, Lila," Ray said, finding a vein in his wife's neck. "Say hello to hell for me." As the drugs took effect, Ray watched the life fade from their eyes with the same clinical detachment he'd once used to observe crime scenes. Justice, he reflected, wasn't always pretty, but was always necessary. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Ray Morrison sat in a coffee shop across from Children's Hospital, watching Emma play in the small playground visible through the window. His daughter had made a complete recovery, her resilience proving stronger than the poison that had nearly killed her. She laughed as she went down the slide, completely unaware of the darkness that had almost consumed her life. The official investigation into Lila and Travis's disappearance had been thorough, but ultimately fruitless. 2 adults with access to drugs and medical knowledge, a history of risky behavior, and mounting evidence of medical malpractice. The FBI profilers theorized they'd fled the country rather than face prosecution. Their bodies were never found, and after 12 weeks, the case was quietly transferred to the Cold Case Division. Ray had returned to work after a brief bereavement leave, accepting condolences from colleagues who assumed his wife had abandoned him and Emma. The sympathy was genuine, and Ray played the role of the betrayed husband with convincing sincerity. After all, he wasn't entirely acting. Lila had betrayed him, just not in the way his fellow officers believed. Emma was thriving under the care of Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman from Ray's neighborhood who'd raised 6 children of her own. She didn't ask probing questions about Emma's mother's absence, accepting Ray's explanation that Lila had left to find herself, with the understanding of someone who'd seen marriage fall apart before. The hospital investigation had been more complex, but equally satisfying. Miguel Santos's video evidence, combined with Patricia Williams' testimony, had exposed the systematic patient abuse that had been occurring at St. Mary's. 17 families received substantial settlements, and the hospital implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar crimes. Most importantly, the 5-year-old boy Travis and Lila had put in a coma finally woke up. His recovery was incomplete. There would be lasting neurological damage, but he was alive, speaking, and learning to walk again. Ray had anonymously established a trust fund for the boy's ongoing medical care, funded by the liquidation of Travis's investment portfolio. As Ray sipped his coffee and watched Emma play, his phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. Emma's 6-month checkup shows perfect health. Whatever she went through, she's completely recovered. You should be proud. She's a remarkable little girl. Pride. Ray did feel proud, though not in the way Dr. Martinez intended. He was proud of the justice he'd delivered, the children he'd protected, the monsters he'd eliminated. The world was a safer place with Travis Kellerman and Lila Morrison gone, and Ray had no regrets about his methods. A young woman approached the playground with a toddler in tow, a mother bringing her child to play. Ray studied her automatically, his detective instincts cataloging details, nervous demeanor, protective positioning near her child, wary glances at other adults. Domestic violence victim, he assessed. Recent separation, still afraid of being found. For a moment, Ray considered approaching her, offering assistance. He had resources, connections, ways to help people disappear when necessary. But he caught himself. His vigilante days were over. Emma needed a father more than the world needed another dark night. Instead, Ray simply watched and waited, ready to intervene if necessary, but content to let others handle their own problems. He learned the hard way that trying to save everyone was a path to madness. Better to focus on protecting what mattered most. Emma ran over to the fence separating the playground from the coffee shop, waving at her father with the uncomplicated joy of a child who felt safe and loved. "Daddy," she called out, "come push me on the swings." Ray finished his coffee and headed outside, leaving a generous tip for the waitress. As he walked toward his daughter, he reflected on the conversation they would have someday, when Emma was old enough to understand why her mother wasn't coming back, why they'd moved to a new house, why Ray was sometimes distant and watchful. He would tell her the truth, eventually. Not all of it, but enough. Emma deserved to know that her father had protected her from monsters, that some people in the world meant children harm, that she should never trust blindly or assume good intentions. But for now, it was enough that she was safe, healthy, and happy. Ray pushed her on the swings as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the playground. Emma giggled and asked to go higher, trusting completely in her father's strong hands and his promise to never let her fall. Ray Morrison had learned many things in his 40 years of life. That evil often wore familiar faces, that justice wasn't always legal, that protecting innocence sometimes required becoming something monstrous yourself. But watching his daughter play in the fading light, he realized he'd learned something else as well. Love, real love, was worth any price, even the price of his own soul. As they walked home together, Emma chattering about her day, while holding Ray's hand, he made a silent promise to his daughter and to himself. The monsters were gone, the nightmares were over, and the future belonged to them. Ray Morrison, detective and father, had won the only war that truly mattered, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure the victory lasted. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Delivery. Jeremy Best had built his life on certainty. As a forensic accountant for the past 15 years, he made a career out of finding patterns in chaos, uncovering truths buried in spreadsheets and bank statements. Numbers didn't lie. People did. He learned that lesson the hard way. The autumn air bit cold as Jeremy pulled into the post office parking lot on Morrison Street. The building was one of those aging brick structures that seemed frozen in 1975, with fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. He'd received a notification about a package, probably the vintage camera equipment he'd ordered online, something to fill the empty hours that plagued his evenings. 7 years. 7 years since they'd buried an empty casket with Travis's name on it. His son, his only child, dead at 19 in what they'd called an accidental drowning during a solo camping trip in the Cascades. They never found the body. The river had been too violent that season, the currents too strong. Christy, his wife, had insisted on the memorial service anyway. "We need closure," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. Jeremy had never gotten closure. The grief was a living thing that occupied the space where his son used to be. Inside, the post office smelled of cardboard and floor cleaner. The clerk, a thin man in his 60s with a name tag, Ronald Cummins, looked up from his computer screen. "Jeremy Best?" Ronald asked, already reaching beneath the counter. "That's me." Ronald placed a medium-sized box on the counter, then hesitated. His weathered hand hovered over a second package, smaller, wrapped in brown paper. The old man's expression shifted, something between discomfort and pity. "There's another one," Ronald said slowly. "Your son came in about 3 months ago. Paid for priority holding. Said to give it to you specifically today, November 15th. Insisted on the date." The world tilted. Jeremy gripped the counter's edge. "My son, Travis Best. That's what the form says." Young man, mid-20s, had your eyes. Seemed real particular about everything. Ronald slid the package across the counter. "I'm sorry if this is... I didn't mean to." Jeremy's hands shook as he took the package. It was light, couldn't have weighed more than a pound. His name was written in handwriting he recognized immediately. Travis's distinctive scrawl, the way he looped his Y's and crossed his T's. Did he say anything else? Ronald shifted uncomfortably. "Just that you'd understand when the time came." He seemed angry, maybe, determined. "Look, if this is some kind of prank." "It's not." Jeremy's voice came out strangled. He grabbed both packages and walked out on legs that barely held him. In his car, Jeremy sat in silence for 5 minutes before he could bring himself to open the brown paper. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note on line paper. "Dad, I'm alive. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. Ask Mom why she lied about my death. Ask her about Carlos Rhodes. Ask her about the life insurance policy she took out 6 months before I died. Ask her where the $750,000 went. I've been watching, documenting everything. The USB has proof. I need you to be strong for what comes next. Meet me at Mercer's Diner on Highway 9, November 22nd, 8 p.m. Come alone. Tell her nothing. She can't know I'm alive yet. Not until we're ready. I love you, Dad. I never stopped. Travis. Jeremy read the note 3 times. Each word was a detonation in his carefully reconstructed life. Christy had lied. His wife of 22 years had looked into his eyes as he wept over their son's death and lied. The grief that had nearly destroyed him, the nights he'd stood in Travis's empty room unable to breathe, the years of counseling and medication, and slowly learning to exist in a world without his boy, all of it built on deception. And who the hell was Carlos Rhodes? Jeremy's phone buzzed. A text from Christy. Don't forget, dinner at the Williamsons tonight. 7 p.m. With a blue shirt. Abby and Sean Williamson were Christy's oldest friends from college. Jeremy had always found them superficial. Abby with her plastic surgery and designer handbags. Sean with his leveraged real estate empire and wandering eye. But Christy adored them, spent hours at their house in the gated community on the north side. Jeremy typed back, I'll be there. He drove home on autopilot, his mind racing through 7 years of memories, searching for cracks in Christy's performance. Had there been signs? Moments when a mask slipped? Their house was a craftsman style in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people waved at each other while mowing lawns and complained about property taxes at HOA meetings. Jeremy had bought it when Travis was 5, imagining it filled with birthday parties and graduation celebrations. Now it felt like a mausoleum. Christy's Mercedes was already in the driveway. Through the window, he could see her in the kitchen, phone pressed her ear, laughing at something. She was 43 but could pass for 35. With honey blonde hair she had touched up religiously and a gym-toned figure she maintained with the dedication of a professional athlete. She'd always been beautiful. Jeremy had thought himself lucky. He slipped the USB drive into his pocket and left the packages in the trunk. He needed time to think, to plan. Travis had said to tell her nothing. Jeremy's entire career had been built on patience, on gathering evidence before making accusations. He could do this. He had to do this. Inside, Christy ended her call and kissed his cheek. Her perfume was the same as always, something French and expensive that Travis used to tease her about. How was your day? She asked, already moving back to the stove where something simmered. Fine. Closed the Harrison audit. That's wonderful. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine. It always did. I knew you'd catch their discrepancies. You're brilliant at what you do. The irony wasn't lost on Jeremy. He caught discrepancies. He found lies buried in financial records. And his own wife had been lying to him for 7 years about the most important thing in his life. How was yours? He asked, watching her carefully. Oh, yoga, then lunch with Marianne. She's thinking about leaving Gerald. Finally, Christy rolled her eyes. I told her years ago he was cheating. Gerald Robinson, another figure in their social circle. Jeremy cataloged the names, wondering who else might be involved in whatever conspiracy had stolen his son. We need to leave by 6:30 for the Williamsons, Christy continued. Abby's been planning this dinner for weeks. Some couple she wants us to meet. He's in real estate development too. Jeremy nodded, excused himself, and went to his study. He locked the door and inserted the USB drive into his laptop with trembling hands. The drive contained folders, dozens of them. Financial records, photographs, surveillance footage, audio recordings. Jeremy opened a file labeled Start Here. It was a video. Travis's face filled the screen, older than Jeremy remembered, with a thin beard and harder eyes. But it was unmistakably his son. Dad, Travis said, and Jeremy's chest constricted. If you're watching this, you got my package. I'm sorry for the shock, but there was no other way. Well, I'm about to show you. It's going to hurt. But you need to see everything before we can make this right. The video cut to a series of images. Bank statements showing transactions from an account in Christy's name. Large deposits. Transfers to offshore accounts. Purchase records for a condo in Portland under a different name, Christy Morgan, her maiden name. Plane tickets. Hotel receipts. Then photographs. Christy with a man Jeremy didn't recognize, tall, dark-haired, handsome in a slick way. They were kissing outside a restaurant, entering a hotel together. The metadata showed dates going back 9 years. 9 years before Travis's supposed death. His name is Carlos Rhodes. Travis's voice continued over the images. Mom met him at a real estate conference in Portland. He's a developer, specializes in luxury condos. They started an affair 8 months later. I found out when I was 17, came home early from school, and overheard a phone call. I didn't tell you because I was stupid, thought I could fix it, thought she'd end it, but got worse. More documents appeared. A life insurance policy on Travis Best, $750,000, beneficiary, Christy Best, taken out 3 months before his death. Medical records showing Travis had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, records Jeremy had never seen, never signed for. She planned it, Travis said, his voice thick with anger. Mom and Carlos, they needed money for his business and her lifestyle. Divorcing you would mean splitting assets. But if I died, the insurance money, plus keeping you in the dark, keeping your income, your stability. She faked my death, Dad. Made me disappear. The video showed more, a death certificate, police reports, witness statements from that camping trip. All manufactured. Travis explained how Christy had drugged him on a supposed father-son trip she'd arranged at the last minute. Jeremy had been away at a conference. How she'd driven him to a remote location where Carlos was waiting. How they'd threatened him. Told him if he ever contacted Jeremy, they'd frame him for a crime that would land him in prison. I was terrified, Travis admitted. I was 19, and she was my mother, and she looked at me like I was just an obstacle. Carlos had documentation. Forged records of me stealing from your firm, dealing drugs. They had everything ready. So I ran. I've been living under a different name in Montana, working construction, try to figure out how to prove what they did without getting arrested or killed. The video cut back to Travis's face. I've spent 3 years gathering evidence. Everything you need is on this drive. But Dad, here's the thing. It's not just about the money anymore. I followed the trail. Carlos's business is a front. He launders money for real estate developers who cut corners, bribe inspectors, use substandard materials. 3 of his buildings have had major safety issues. 1 collapsed during construction. 2 workers died. Mom knows. She's been helping him move money, hide assets. They're both criminals. Jeremy sat back, his hands over his face. The woman he'd shared a bed with for 2 decades had systematically destroyed their family for money and a lover. She'd let him grieve, had held him while he cried, had gone to therapy sessions where she performed the role of grieving mother while living a second life. I need your help to bring them down, Travis said. Both of them. Not just for what they did to us, but for those workers who died, for everyone they've hurt. Meet me next week. We'll plan everything. And Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't come to you sooner. I was scared and stupid, and I should have trusted you. I love you. The video ended. Jeremy sat in the darkness of his study, rage and grief warring in his chest. Christy's voice called from downstairs. Jeremy, we need to leave in 10 minutes. He wiped his eyes, straightened his tie, and made a decision. If Christy could perform for 7 years, he could perform for 1 week. He would go to this dinner, smile, and make small talk, and play the role of devoted husband. And while he did, he would plan, because Jeremy Best was very, very good at uncovering lies. And Christy was about to learn what happened when you lied to a man who made a living catching liars. Chapter 2, The Double Life. The Williamsons' house was everything Christy aspired to. 3 stories of modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows, situated on 2 acres with a view of the Sound. Inside, everything was white and chrome and expensive, the kind of sterile perfection that appeared in design magazines. Jeremy moved through the dinner party on autopilot. A glass of wine in his hand he didn't drink, nodding at conversations he didn't hear. He watched Christy work the room in a black cocktail dress, her laugh musical and practiced. She touched Sean Williamson's arm while telling a story, leaned in to whisper something to Abby that made her gasp and giggle. She was performing, just like she always performed. How had he never seen it? Jeremy, Abby approached with another couple in tow. I want you to meet Cassie and Jordan Schultz. Jordan's in commercial development. I thought you two might have war stories to share about dealing with contractors and budgets. Jordan Schultz was in his 50s, with silver hair and an expensive suit. He shook Jeremy's hand with the firm grip of a man who'd closed 1,000 deals. Cassie was younger, mid-30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Forensic accounting, Jordan said. That must be fascinating work. Find a lot of embezzlers. More than you'd think, Jeremy replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his head. People always think they're smarter than the paper trail. They never are. I've always said, Sean interjected, joining their circle, that in business, trust is everything. But verification is better. He laughed his own joke. Speaking of which, Christy mentioned you just closed a big audit. The Harrison case. Jeremy's attention sharpened. Christy had mentioned his work to Sean. She never discussed his cases. Always said they were boring, too technical. Just another fraud case, Jeremy said carefully. Nothing exciting. Still, Sean continued, must be satisfying to catch them. To know you're the one who unraveled their lies. His smile was affable, but something in his tone made Jeremy uneasy. Christy appeared at Jeremy's elbow, threading her arm through his. Darling, Abby wants to show me her new meditation room. Will you be all right here? Of course. He kissed her cheek, and she didn't flinch. Didn't show any sign of guilt. She was that good. As the women moved away, Jordan pulled out his phone. Actually, Jeremy, since you're in accounting, maybe you could glance at something for me. I'm considering a partnership on a development project, but some of the numbers seem off. Would you mind? It was just drinks and conversation, but Jeremy's instincts, honed from years of finding fraud, prickled. Before he could respond, his own phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Dad, it's T. Don't trust anyone at that party. Rhodes has connections there. Be careful what you say. We'll explain everything next week. Jeremy's blood ran cold. Travis was watching, which meant Carlos Rhodes had someone at this dinner party. His eyes swept the room. Sean? Jordan? Someone else? Actually, Jeremy said to Jordan, I'd be happy to look at those numbers. Why don't you email them to me? I'll need my proper software to do a thorough analysis. Jordan nodded, seemed satisfied. They exchanged business cards. As Jeremy pocketed the card, he noticed Sean watching them from across the room, his expression unreadable. The dinner itself was an elaborate affair. Multiple courses, wine pairings, the kind of meal that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Jeremy sat between Cassie Schultz and Abby, with Christy across from him next to Sean. He forced himself to eat, to respond to questions, to seem normal. Jeremy's always been the stable one, Christy said at one point, her hand reaching across the table to touch his. After we lost Travis, I don't know what I would have done without him. He's my rock. The table made sympathetic noises. Abby squeezed Christy's other hand. You two have been through so much, but you came out stronger. Grief either breaks you or bonds you, Christy said, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. We chose to let it bond us. Jeremy wanted to throw his wine in her face. Instead, he smiled and said, Christy's the strong one. She never gave up hope that someday, somehow, we'd find peace with what happened. Christy's expression flickered, just for a microsecond, before smoothing back into grateful perfection. Had he imagined it? Or had she caught the double meaning in his words? After dinner, the men retired to Sean's study for cigars and whiskey, while the women remained in the living room. The study was all dark wood and leather, with walls lined with books Jeremy suspected Sean had never read. So, Sean said, pouring amber liquid into crystal glasses, what do you really think is happening with the market? I've got 3 developments in the pipeline, but I'm wondering if I should hold off. Jordan and another man, Larry Hess, something in commercial real estate, launched into a discussion of interest rates and construction costs. Jeremy half listened, his mind on Travis's warning. Rhodes had the right idea, Larry was saying. Get in early on these luxury condos. Flip them before anyone looks too closely at the construction. Margins are incredible if you know how to manage the inspectors. Jeremy's attention snapped into focus. Carlos Rhodes? You know him? Sure, Larry said, surprised. We've worked together on a couple of projects. Smart guy. Aggressive, but that's what you need to be in this market. Why? Just heard the name somewhere, Jeremy said casually. Thinking of diversifying some investments. I could introduce you, Sean offered. Carlos and I go way back. In fact, he's supposed to join us for golf next month. You should come. We'll make it a foursome. Jeremy hid his reaction behind his glass. Sean knew Carlos. How close were they? Close enough to be involved in Christie's affair? In Travis's fake death? That'd be great, Jeremy said, always looking to expand my network. The conversation moved on, but Jeremy's mind raced. Travis had said Rhodes had connections at this party. Sean seemed the obvious answer. But what about the others? How deep did this conspiracy go? When they rejoined the women, Jeremy found Christie deep in conversation with Cassie Schultz. As he approached, Christie smoothly changed topics. So I told her the secret is consistency. You can't expect results if you only show up to yoga once a week. But Jeremy had heard the tail end of their previous conversation. Portland property is a good investment, but you need the right partner. Portland, where Christie had her secret condo, where Carlos Rhodes operated. The drive home was quiet. Christie hummed along to the radio, seemingly content. Jeremy kept his eyes on the road and his hands steady on the wheel. That was nice, Christie said. Cassie's interesting. She's looking to invest in some development projects. I might connect her with a few people I know. What people? Jeremy asked, keeping his tone mild. Oh, just some contacts from when I was doing real estate consulting, before everything happened. Her voice caught slightly. I've been thinking about getting back into it, actually. Just part-time. Something to keep me busy. Real estate consulting. Is that what she called helping her lover launder money? If that's what you want, Jeremy said. We could use the extra income. The market's been rough. Have we been having money problems? Christie's voice sharpened. You didn't mention. No, Jeremy assured her. Everything's fine. I just meant it never hurts to have more. Christie relaxed. Well, I'm not worried about money. We've always been comfortable. And with the life insurance from. She trailed off, dab at her eyes. Sorry. Still hard sometimes. The life insurance from their son's death. $750,000. She collected on a policy taken out 3 months before she faked that death. And she had the audacity to cry about it while sitting 2 feet away from him. Jeremy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 7 more days. He could maintain this facade for 7 more days. At home, Christie went through her evening routine, removing makeup, applying creams, checking her phone. Jeremy watched from the bedroom doorway as she typed a message, smiling at the response. Everything okay? He asked. She jumped slightly, hadn't heard him. Oh, yes, just Marianne. She's made a decision about Gerald. She's leaving him. I'm so proud of her. Jeremy nodded, climbed into bed. Christie joined him moments later, curling into her side of the mattress they'd shared for 22 years. Once, he would have reached for her. Now the space between them felt like an ocean. In the darkness, Jeremy waited until her breathing evened into sleep. Then he slipped out of bed and went to his study. He spent the next 4 hours going through the files Travis had provided. The evidence was damning and detailed. Christie had opened offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She transferred money in small increments to avoid triggering reporting requirements. She created shell companies to hide assets. And Carlos Rhodes was deeper than just an affair. He was running a criminal enterprise, and Christie was his partner. But more than that, Jeremy found something Travis might not have discovered yet. In one of Carlos's emails, there was a reference to the project in Willow Creek. Jeremy knew Willow Creek, a new development 30 miles outside the city. Luxury apartments, aggressively marketed. He pulled up public records. The building had been completed 8 months ago, and 2 months after opening, there had been a major issue with the foundation. The developer had quietly settled with residents and made repairs, keeping it out of the news. But Jeremy found the inspection reports that had been filed with the county. The foundation had been built with substandard concrete. The original inspections had been falsified. 2 deaths at a construction site. Foundation problems covered up. And Carlos Rhodes' name as a silent partner buried in an LLC within an LLC. Jeremy sat back, a plan forming. Travis wanted justice, wanted both Christie and Carlos to pay. And Jeremy knew exactly how to give it to him. He would use what he knew best, forensic accounting, paper trails, evidence that was irrefutable. He would document everything, build a case so airtight that neither Christie nor Carlos could escape. And then he would bring them both down, not in some dramatic confrontation, but the way he dismantled all fraudsters, systematically, thoroughly, and completely. But first, he needed to meet his son. He needed to see Travis alive, hold him, apologize for not being smart enough to question the lie. And together, they would finish this. Chapter 3. The Investigation. Jeremy spent the next 6 days living a double life as meticulously crafted as Christie's own deception. Each morning, he kissed his wife goodbye and drove to his office downtown. But instead of diving into his regular caseload, he used his access to financial databases and his professional network to dig deeper into Carlos Rhodes and Christie's criminal enterprise. What he found was worse than he'd imagined. Carlos Rhodes, 41, had built his reputation as a fast-talking developer who specialized in luxury conversions, taking aging buildings and transforming them into high-end condos. On paper, his business looked legitimate. But Jeremy found the gaps, the irregularities, the patterns that screamed fraud. Rhodes had a network of shell companies that moved money in circles. He'd pay contractors with Company A, which would then invoice Company B, which paid Company C, which eventually paid back to a Rhodes-controlled account. It was a money laundering operation disguised as construction management. But more damning were the building violations. Jeremy found 6 properties where corners had been cut dangerously. The Willow Creek Foundation, a high-rise in Portland where the fire suppression system used substandard materials. An apartment complex where electrical work was done by unlicensed contractors. The construction site deaths Travis had mentioned. Jeremy found the full reports. Gerald Robinson, Marianne's husband, had been the site supervisor. He'd known about the safety violations and looked the other way, because he was being paid by Carlos Rhodes through a shell company, and the money had been managed by Christie. Jeremy built a spreadsheet that would have made his professors proud. Every transaction, every violation, every lie was documented and cross-referenced. He had bank statements, emails he'd recovered from Christie's cloud backup. She'd used Travis's birthday as her password. The irony wasn't lost on him. And inspection reports. At night, he came home and performed the role of loving husband. Christie never suspected. She chattered about her day, her friends, her yoga classes. She showed him paint samples for the guest room. She cooked his favorite meals and asked about his work. "You seem distracted lately," she said on Thursday night, 3 days before his meeting with Travis. "Is everything okay?" They were in the kitchen, Christie chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, while Jeremy pretended to read a magazine at the island counter. "Just a complicated case at work," he said. "Lots of moving parts. Anything you can talk about?" "Not really. Confidentiality agreements." He looked up, studied her face. "Christie, do you ever regret anything? In our life together?" Her hand stilled on the cutting board. "What kind of question is that?" "Just thinking about mortality, I guess. Wondering if we've done everything we wanted to do." Christie set down her knife and came around the island. She cupped his face in her hands, looked into his eyes with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "Jeremy, you're the best thing that ever happened to me." "Well," her voice caught, "you and Travis. I regret every day that he's not here. But I don't regret a single moment with you. You've given me security, stability, love. What more could anyone want?" It was such a perfect performance that Jeremy almost believed it. But he'd seen the bank statements. He knew about the Portland condo, the offshore accounts, the lifestyle she'd been building with Carlos Rhodes. Security and stability, yes, she wanted those things. But from him, not with him. "I'm glad," Jeremy said, and kissed her forehead. "I just wanted you to know that I love you, no matter what happens." Something flickered in Christie's expression. Caution? Fear, before she smiled. "Nothing's going to happen. We're fine. Better than fine." That night, Jeremy couldn't sleep. He lay in the darkness, listening to Christie's breathing, and thought about Travis. His son had been alone for 7 years, living under a false name, working construction in Montana, gathering evidence. Jeremy had failed to protect him once. He wouldn't fail again. On Friday, Jeremy made a call to his friend Larry Hess from the dinner party, the real estate developer who knew Carlos Rhodes. They met for lunch at a steakhouse downtown. I appreciate you meeting me, Jeremy said over drinks. I wanted to pick your brain about investment opportunities. Larry was happy to talk. He spent 45 minutes outlining his various projects, the profit margins, the risks. Jeremy listened patiently, then steered the conversation where he needed it. You mentioned Carlos Rhodes the other night. What's his reputation in the industry? Larry hesitated, glanced around the restaurant. Honestly, Carlos is brilliant, but ruthless. He makes money, that's undeniable. But there are rumors. Nothing proven, you understand, but let's just say if I were doing a project with him, I want everything in writing and I'd hire my own inspectors. Safety issues, corners cut, materials swapped out. Inspectors who suddenly get very flexible about code requirements. Larry leaned forward. Look, I've worked with him twice. Made good money both times. But I wouldn't live in one of his buildings. Anyone else know this? Sure, it's an open secret in certain circles. But Carlos has connections. Lawyers, politicians, people who can make problems disappear. So people shut up and take their cut. Larry studied Jeremy. Why the interest? You're not thinking of investing, are you? Just due diligence, Jeremy said smoothly. A friend mentioned him as a potential partner. Tell your friend to be careful. Carlos Rhodes is the kind of guy who'll smile at your funeral while counting the insurance money. After lunch, Jeremy sat in his car and added notes to his file. If Rhodes's reputation was common knowledge, then others might be willing to talk. He made a list of former contractors, inspectors, anyone who'd worked with Rhodes and might have evidence. But he was running out of time. The meeting with Travis was tomorrow night. Jeremy needed to decide how to play this. Should he bring everything to the police immediately? Or wait, build an even stronger case? His phone rang. Christy. Hey, honey. Her voice was sugary sweet. I'm going to Portland tomorrow for the day. Abby, and I want to hit that new boutique she's been raving about. We'll probably make a day of it. Spa, lunch. I'll be back late. You'll be okay for dinner on your own? Portland, where Carlos Rhodes lived, where Christy's secret condo was located. Sure, Jeremy said. Take your time. Enjoy yourself. You're the best. Love you. After she hung up, Jeremy made a decision. He called in a favor from a former colleague, a private investigator named Seth Willis who owed him from a case 3 years ago. Seth, I need surveillance. Tomorrow, starting early. I'll send you the subject's photo and vehicle information. I need to know everywhere she goes, everyone she meets. This about your wife? Seth asked, no judgment in his voice. Yes. Say no more. I'll handle it personally. You'll have photo and video documentation of everything. The next morning, Christy left the house at 9 in her Mercedes, wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. Jeremy watched from the window as she pulled away, then went to his study. Seth sent his first update at 10:47 a.m. Subject met male individual at coffee shop, downtown Portland. Physical contact suggests intimate relationship. Photos attached. The photos showed Christy and Carlos Rhodes embracing in a parking lot, kissing like teenagers. Carlos was classically handsome in that generic way. Tall, fit, perfectly styled hair, expensive watch. The kind of man who looked successful even if he wasn't. More updates followed through the day. Christy and Carlos had lunch at an upscale restaurant. They went to the condo. Seth got photos of them entering together, sent the address which matched Jeremy's records. They stayed for 3 hours. When they emerged, Christy's hair was mussed and her lipstick gone. At 4:30 p.m., Seth sent subject and male individual meeting with third party at construction site. Address attached. Appears to be business meeting. Recording audio. The audio file captured Christy's voice clearly. Told you, Gerald's handled. He's not going to talk about the Willow Creek issues. I made sure of it. But we need to be more careful going forward. If anyone starts connecting the dots. Relax. Carlos's voice, smooth and confident. We've got lawyers. We've got documentation that shows we followed every regulation. Even if someone questions the materials, it's the contractor's fault, not ours. And the deaths at the Mercer project? Settled. Families signed NDAs. It's done, Christy. Stop worrying. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about Jeremy. He's been asking questions lately. Seemed interested when Sean mentioned your name. A pause. Then Carlos. Does he suspect? No. God, no. Jeremy's brilliant with numbers, but he's oblivious about people. He never even realized about us. 7 years, and he had no clue. Travis was the only one who figured it out, and we handled that. Jeremy's hands clenched into fists as he listened. Still, Christy continued, we should be careful. Maybe cool off for a few weeks, not see each other as much. Baby, we've been careful for almost a decade. Everything's fine. The Travis situation was the only risk, and that's behind us. He's gone. Jeremy's grief makes him easy to manipulate. Trust me. The recording continued with logistics, another property they were planning to develop, inspections that needed to be bypassed, contractors who needed payments. Christy was neck-deep in it all. She wasn't just covering for Carlos. She was an active, willing participant in fraud and conspiracy. At 6:45 p.m., Christy texted, heading home now. Spent way too much money, but got some gorgeous things. See you soon. Jeremy didn't respond. At 7:30 p.m., he drove to Mercer's Diner, a roadside establishment 45 minutes from his house, tucked off Highway 9. The parking lot was nearly empty. Jeremy pulled into a spot near the back and waited, his heart hammering. At 8:02 p.m., a pickup truck pulled in beside him. The driver's door opened. Travis stepped out. He was taller than Jeremy remembered, broader in the shoulders. His face had lost its boyish softness, replaced by the hardness of someone who'd survived something terrible. But his eyes were the same, gray-blue, just like Jeremy's. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Travis moved forward and Jeremy was out of his car. They were hugging, both men crying in the parking lot of the diner off Highway 9. Dad, Travis's voice broke. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have found a way sooner. I should have. No, Jeremy pulled back, gripped his son's shoulders. No apologies. You survived. That's what matters. You survived and you came back. They went inside, took a booth in the back corner where they could talk privately. Travis looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Jeremy wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but Travis spoke first. I know you got my USB drive. Did you go through everything? All of it. And I've been doing my own digging. Travis, it's worse than you realized. The deaths at the construction sites, the fraud, it's systematic. They've been doing this for years. Travis nodded grimly. I figured. I could only prove what I could see. But Dad, here's what you need to know. Mom and Carlos think I'm permanently gone. They think I'm too scared to ever come back, that I'll stay hidden forever. That's their mistake. What's your plan? My plan. Travis laughed bitterly. I want them in prison. Both of them. I want everyone to know what they did, what they are. But I'm one person with questionable evidence. You're a forensic accountant with credentials and professional standing. Together, we can build a case that the authorities can't ignore. Jeremy leaned forward. I've already started. I have documentation of the money laundering, the offshore accounts, everything. But here's what I'm thinking. We don't just go to the police. We go to the FBI. This crosses state lines, involves multiple jurisdictions. And I have contacts in federal white-collar crime units. Can we trust them? Yes. But more importantly, I know how to present evidence, so it's irrefutable. We build the case so tight that even Carlos's lawyers can't find a crack. They spent the next 3 hours going over everything. Jeremy shared what he'd learned. Travis filled in gaps with his own investigation. They built a timeline, identified every person involved, mapped out the money trail. There's one more thing, Travis said as they prepared to leave. Once we go public with this, Mom's going to flip. She'll do anything to save herself. You need to be ready for that. I am. No, Dad. I mean really ready. She'll lie about you, make accusations, try to turn this around. You need to protect yourself. Document everything. Record conversations if you can. Don't let her corner you alone. Jeremy studied his son's face, saw the pain there. She really threatened you? Told you she'd have you arrested if you came back. She looked me in the eyes and said I was a mistake she should have fixed years ago. Travis's voice was flat. Carlos said they'd plant drugs in my car, guns in my apartment, whatever it took. They had photos ready, documents, a whole narrative about how I was a troubled kid who'd stolen from your firm. I was 19, Dad. I was terrified. So I ran. I'm going to make her pay for that, Jeremy said quietly. For all of it. We both will, Travis corrected. Together, they made plans for Travis to stay hidden a while longer, to keep gathering evidence while Jeremy laid the groundwork with the FBI. They exchanged new, secure phone numbers. And when they said goodbye in that parking lot, Jeremy held his son tight and made a promise. This ends soon. And when it does, you come home. Really home. No more hiding. Jeremy drove back with a clarity he hadn't felt in 7 years. The grief that had defined him, the loss that had nearly destroyed him, all of it had been a lie. But now he had truth. He had evidence. He had his son, and he had a plan that would bring Christy and Carlos Rhodes down completely. Chapter 4. The Federal Case. Monday morning, Jeremy walked into the FBI field office downtown with a briefcase containing 3 years of evidence compiled by Travis and enhanced by his own investigation. He'd secured a meeting with Special Agent Jimmy Harvey, a veteran white-collar crime investigator Jeremy had worked with twice on fraud cases. Harvey was in his late 40s, with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of financial crime imaginable. He listened without interruption as Jeremy laid out the entire story. Christie's affair, Travis's fake death, the insurance fraud, Carlos Rhodes's construction fraud, the deaths, everything. You understand what you're alleging here? Harvey said when Jeremy finished. Conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, manslaughter at minimum. Your wife will face serious prison time. I understand. Jeremy's voice was steady. I want justice. For my son, for the workers who died, for everyone they've defrauded. Harvey spent the next hour reviewing the documents Jeremy had brought. Bank statements, offshore account information, construction records, inspection reports, emails, photos, the USB drive from Travis. Jeremy had organized everything chronologically, with a master index that connected every transaction to a specific crime. This is thorough, Harvey admitted. Remarkably thorough. You've essentially done our job for us. I'm a forensic accountant. It's what I do. Where's your son now? Safe. And willing to testify when needed. But he wants assurances, witness protection if necessary, immunity from any charges Christie or Rhodes might try to fabricate against him. Harvey made notes. I'll need to bring in my supervisor, possibly the DOJ. This is big, Jeremy. Multiple jurisdictions, federal crimes, potential RICO implications if we can prove a continuing criminal enterprise. We're talking years of investigation and prosecution. How long before you can move on them? We don't move on them. We investigate. Could take months to verify everything, build the case properly, get search warrants, financial records from banks. Months. Jeremy leaned forward. These people let my son believe he was hunted for 7 years. They're still actively committing fraud. How many more people need to get hurt while you dot I's and cross T's? I understand your frustration, Harvey said calmly. But we do this right, or we do it not at all. Defense attorneys will tear apart anything that looks rushed or sloppy. You want them in prison? Then we build an unshakable case. Jeremy took a breath, nodded. What do you need from me? Everything you have, which you've already provided. Access to your own financial records to verify you had no knowledge or involvement. And your son, I need to interview him, take his formal statement. He'll cooperate fully. One more thing. Harvey's expression grew serious. You need to act normal at home. Don't confront your wife. Don't change your routine. If she suspects, she could destroy evidence, flee the country, tip off Rhodes. Can you do that? Continue living with her, pretending everything's fine. Jeremy thought of Christy kissing him goodnight, of her hands on his face telling him he was the best thing that ever happened to her, of 7 years of grief she'd manufactured and maintained. Yes, he said, I can do that. The investigation began in earnest. Harvey brought in a team, financial analysts, another agent to handle the construction fraud angle, a prosecutor from the DOJ. They subpoenaed bank record from the Cayman Islands, got warrants for Christie and Carlos's communications, started interviewing former contractors and construction workers. Jeremy went about his daily life. He worked his regular cases, came home to Christie, attended dinner parties and social events. He played the role of devoted husband so well that even he sometimes forgot he was acting. But he was also documenting everything. He had a recording app on his phone that ran constantly when he was home. He photographed documents he found in Christie's home office. He tracked her movements, her calls, her moods. And 3 times a week, he met with Travis at different locations. A park 40 miles away, a coffee shop in a town where nobody knew them, the diner on Highway 9. They shared information, coordinated with Harvey, planned for what came next. "You've changed," Travis said during one of these meetings. It was mid-December now, nearly a month into the FBI investigation. "You seem harder." "I'm just seeing clearly now," Jeremy replied. "For years I thought I was dealing with grief. Turns out I was dealing with betrayal. Does it help? Seeing her knowing what she is?" Jeremy considered. "It helps me understand that the woman I married doesn't exist. Maybe she never did. Christy performed a role, and I was the audience. But the performance is over." Travis looked at his father with something like admiration. "I was scared you'd try to forgive her, or make excuses. There are no excuses for what she did. To you, to those workers, to me. She made her choices." Jeremy met his son's eyes. "And now she'll face the consequences." The FBI moved methodically. They confirmed the offshore accounts, traced the money from the life insurance policy, documented every building code violation at Carlos's properties. They interviewed the families of the workers who died, found that the settlements had been coercive, the NDAs signed under duress. In mid-December, Harvey called Jeremy to the field office. "We've got enough," he said without preamble. "The DOJ is ready to move forward. We'll execute search warrants simultaneously at your home, Carlos Rhodes's properties, and several shell company addresses. We'll arrest both of them on federal charges." When? December 20th. Friday. "We want to catch them both together if possible. Make sure neither gets a warning. Can you verify Christy will be home that morning? She's usually home until 9 when she goes to yoga." "Perfect. Jeremy, you understand how this will go down? Federal agents will come to your house with a warrant. They'll search everything. You'll be questioned. Your neighbors will see. This becomes public. Understand. Your wife will likely make bail pending trial. She'll be forbidden from contacting certain people, including Rhodes, but she'll be released. Are you prepared for that?" Jeremy had thought about this moment for weeks. "Will I be legally required to let her stay in the house?" "No. It's your home. You can change the locks. Ask her to leave." "Then that's what I'll do." Harvey nodded slowly. "One more thing. We're going to freeze her assets, all the accounts we can link to the fraud. She's going to be angry and desperate. Be careful. She can't hurt me anymore," Jeremy said. "She already did the worst thing possible." But he was wrong about that. Christy had one more card to play. Chapter 5, The Raid. December 20th dawned cold and gray. Jeremy woke at 6, dressed for work as usual. Christy was still asleep, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful. He looked at her for a long moment, memorizing this last image of his wife before everything exploded. In the kitchen, he made coffee and waited. Harvey had said they'd arrive at 8:30. Jeremy had 3 hours to maintain his performance one final time. Christy emerged at 7, wrapped in a silk robe, yawning. "Morning," she murmured, kissing his cheek. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. Big presentation today." The lie came easily now. She poured coffee, sat across from him at the island. "Jeremy, I've been thinking. For Christmas, maybe we should go away somewhere? Just the two of us. We haven't traveled in so long. Where would you want to go?" "I don't know. Caribbean? Europe? Somewhere warm and far away where we can just be together." Her hand covered his. "I feel like we've been drifting lately. I want to reconnect." Jeremy studied her face. Was this genuine? Or had she sensed something? Was she planning to flee? He squeezed her hand. "That sounds perfect. Let's plan it for New Year's." She smiled, relieved. "Really? You're not too busy." "Never too busy for you." They finished breakfast. Christy went upstairs to get ready for yoga. Jeremy texted Harvey, "On schedule. She's getting ready to leave. We'll delay her." At 8:15, Jeremy went upstairs. "Christy, can you help me with something before you go? I can't find that warning information for the dishwasher. It's making that noise again." Christy sighed, but followed him to the kitchen. "Where did you look?" "The file cabinet, but The doorbell rang. Jeremy checked his watch. 8:27 a.m. 3 minutes early. "I'll get it," he said, his heart suddenly hammering. This was it. He opened the door to find 4 federal agents, Harvey at the front. Behind them, 3 sedans were parked in the driveway. Jeremy Best? Harvey said formally, holding up his badge. We have a warrant to search this property in connection with an ongoing federal investigation. Christie appeared in the hallway. What? Jeremy, what's going on? Harvey stepped inside. Christie Best? You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and filing false insurance claims. He nodded to a female agent who moved forward with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Christie's face went white, then red. This is insane. Jeremy, tell them, this is a mistake. Ma'am, please don't resist, the agent said, turning Christie around to cuff her hands behind her back. I'm not resisting. Jeremy. Christie's voice rose to a shriek. Tell them, you know I would never. Jeremy, please. Jeremy stood silent, watching as they read Christie her rights. Her eyes locked on his, filled with panic and betrayal and fury. You knew, she whispered. Oh my God, you knew. Yes, Jeremy said quietly. I knew. How long? Since Travis sent me the package. Christie's face transformed from panic to pure rage. Travis, that little shit is alive? Where is he? Where the fuck is he? Somewhere you can't hurt him, Jeremy said. Harvey interrupted. Ma'am, we need to take you downtown now. You can call a lawyer from there. As they led Christie toward the door, she turned back to Jeremy. You're going to regret this. I will destroy you. Everything you have, everything you are, I will take it all. You already tried that, Jeremy said. 7 years ago. It didn't work. They took her out to one of the sedans. Through the window, Jeremy watched neighbors gathering on their lawns, phones out, filming. Christie's head was down, her body rigid with rage as they put her in the back seat. Harvey stayed behind with the other agents as they began searching the house. Carlos Rhodes was arrested simultaneously at his office. Both will be arraigned this afternoon. What happens now? We search, document everything. You're free to go to work if you want, but we'll be here most of the day. Jeremy shook his head. I'll stay. Answer any questions you have. By noon, the agents had found everything. Christie's laptop with incriminating emails, documents in her home office, even a burner phone hidden in her dresser that contained messages to Carlos. It was all being photographed, cataloged, taken as evidence. Jeremy's phone rang constantly. Friends, colleagues, everyone who'd seen the news reports. He ignored most of them, but answered when he saw it was Travis. Dad, I'm watching the news. They got her. Both of them. They're being arraigned this afternoon. Travis was quiet for a moment. I thought I'd feel better, seeing her arrested. But I just feel empty. I know. But Travis, it's done. You can come home now. Really home. Not yet. Not until the trial's over. I don't trust her not to try something. Jeremy couldn't argue with that. Harvey had warned him. Christie would be out on bail within hours, and desperate people did unpredictable things. The arraignment was at 3 p.m. Jeremy attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Christie had already secured a lawyer, Nicholas Ryder, an expensive criminal defense attorney from Seattle known for getting wealthy clients minimal sentences. Ryder argued for low bail, painted Christie as a respected member of the community with no criminal record and no flight risk. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Adriana Nielsen, countered with evidence of offshore accounts and the severity of the charges. The judge set bail at $250,000, which Jeremy knew Christie could make. She was released within 2 hours, her face a mask of fury as she walked out of the courthouse with Ryder. Jeremy had already gone home and changed the locks. He'd packed Christie's essential belongings, clothes, toiletries, personal items, and left them in the garage. He'd also gotten a restraining order preventing her from contacting Travis. At 7 p.m., Christie's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Jeremy watched from the window as she tried her key, found it didn't work. She pounded on the door. Jeremy, open this door. This is my house, too. He opened it, keeping the chain on. Your lawyer will be in touch about property division. You need to find somewhere else to stay. You can't kick me out of my own home. Actually, I can. The house is in my name only. You're welcome to fight me on it in civil court, but right now, you're not coming in. Christie's face contorted. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so smart, so much better than me. But you're nothing. I wasted 20 years on you, pretending to love a boring, weak man who couldn't even satisfy me in bed. Then you should be relieved to leave, Jeremy said calmly. Where's Travis? I know you know. Tell me. You'll see him at your trial. Where he testifies against you. I'm his mother. You're the woman who threatened her own son to cover up fraud. You lost the right to call yourself his mother the day you told him he was a mistake. Christie's mouth opened and closed. He told you that. He told me everything. Every threat, every lie, every moment of fear you put him through. It's all documented, and it's all going to come out at trial. For a moment, Christie's face crumpled, actual emotion breaking through the mask. But then she straightened, and the rage returned. You want a war? Fine. I'll give you a war. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd stayed blind and grateful. She got back in her car and screeched out of the driveway. Jeremy closed the door, his hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You're going to pay for this. Both of you. Jeremy showed it to Harvey the next day. The FBI traced the number to a burner phone purchased with cash, but they added it to the file as evidence of witness intimidation. Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The next 3 months were a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and fallout. The story was irresistible to local news. Suburban wife faked son's death for insurance money while helping lover run criminal construction business. It was tawdry and dramatic, and everyone wanted details. Jeremy's phone rang constantly with interview requests. He declined them all, issued a single statement through Harvey. I'm cooperating fully with federal investigators and asked for privacy during this difficult time. But privacy was impossible. Reporters camped outside his house. Colleagues whispered in break rooms. Clients asked if he was trustworthy, if his home problems affected his work. Jeremy handled it with the same calm competence he brought to balance sheets, methodically, thoroughly, showing no emotion. Christie, meanwhile, was unraveling. Without access to the offshore accounts, all frozen, without Jeremy's income, without Carlos, who'd been denied bail due to flight risk, she was scrambling. She'd moved in with Abby and Sean Williamson initially, but that lasted only 2 weeks before Abby kicked her out, claiming she couldn't handle the media attention. Turns out, Travis said when he and Jeremy met in January, Abby's more interested in her reputation than her friendship. Who knew? Jeremy had filled Travis in on all the social circle fallout. Marianne Shepard had divorced Gerald after learning about his involvement in the construction fraud. Sean Williamson was under investigation for potential knowledge of Rhodes's activities. Half their former friends had either cut contact entirely or reached out to Jeremy with awkward apologies for not seeing Christie's true nature. People are cowards, Jeremy said simply. They follow whatever narrative seems safest. Travis studied his father. They were at the diner again, same booth. You're different now. Harder. Is that permanent? Would you prefer I go back to being naive? No, I miss him of the guy who believed the best in people. That guy's son was alive, and he didn't know it. I don't want to be him anymore. The trial was set for March. In the meantime, the FBI's investigation had expanded. They'd found evidence linking Carlos Rhodes to 3 other developers in similar fraudulent schemes. The Willow Creek settlement had been reopened. Families of the workers who died were pursuing civil suits. Christie's lawyer, Nicholas Ryder, tried every trick. He filed motions to suppress evidence, motions to dismiss, motions to separate Christie's trial from Carlos's. None of them worked. The evidence was too solid, too well documented. In February, Ryder approached Jeremy through Harvey with a plea deal offer. Christie would plead guilty to the insurance fraud in exchange for dropping the conspiracy charges. She'd face 3 to 5 years. No, Jeremy said immediately. Jeremy, think about this, Harvey cautioned. A trial is risky. Juries are unpredictable. A plea deal guarantees she faces consequences. She threatened my son. She participated in fraud that killed people. 3 to 5 years isn't justice. The construction fraud charges might not stick to her specifically. We can prove she knew about it, helped launder money, But proving she's directly responsible for the deaths? That's harder. The jury might see her as just a woman in love making bad choices. Then we make sure they see the truth. Travis, present at this meeting, spoke up. Dad's right. If she gets a light sentence, she'll be out in 3 years. She could come after us again. We need her locked up for as long as possible. Harvey sighed. Okay, we go to trial. But understand, this means Travis has to testify. His story will be public. The defense will try to discredit him, make him look like an unstable kid who ran away and made up stories. I can handle it, Travis said. I've been handling it for 7 years. The trial began on March 15th in federal court. The courtroom was packed. Media, curious onlookers, families of the workers who died, former friends and colleagues. Jeremy sat in the front row, Travis beside him. Christy entered in a tasteful gray suit, her hair pulled back, her expression composed. She looked nothing like the woman who'd screamed threats in Jeremy's driveway. She looked like a victim. The prosecution's case, led by Adriana Nielsen, was methodical and devastating. They presented the financial records, the offshore accounts, the insurance policy. They showed the emails between Christy and Carlos planning Travis's fake death. They brought in the post office clerk who'd given Jeremy the package. They detailed the construction fraud, the deaths, the money trails. Nicholas Ryder's defense strategy was to paint Christy as a victim herself, a woman manipulated by her charming, criminal boyfriend into progressively worse behavior. She'd started with an affair, he argued, and Carlos had gradually pulled her into his schemes. She wasn't evil, just weak. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryder said in his opening statement, Christy Best is not a criminal mastermind. She's a woman who made terrible decisions because she fell for the wrong man. Yes, she had an affair. Yes, she participated in fraudulent activities. But she did so under coercion and manipulation. Carlos Rhodes is the true villain here. The prosecution countered by showing Christie's active role. The emails where she suggested specific schemes. The offshore account she opened. Her coldness when discussing Travis's disappearance. On the 4th day, Travis took the stand. Jeremy watched his son walk to the witness box, place his hand on the Bible, swear to tell the truth. Travis looked young despite his 26 years, vulnerable in his suit and tie. Adriana Nielsen walked him through his testimony gently. Travis explained how he'd discovered the affair, how Christy and Carlos had threatened him, how they'd faked his death and forced him into hiding. Can you tell the jury what your mother said to you that last day? Nielsen asked. Travis's voice shook slightly. She said I was a mistake she should have fixed years ago. She said I was ruining her life, and if I ever came back, she'd make sure I went to prison for crimes I didn't commit. She had documents ready, fake evidence of theft, drug dealing, everything. Carlos said they'd planted drugs in my car, just in case. I was 19. I was terrified. Did you believe they would follow through on these threats? Yes, absolutely. My mother looked at me like I was nothing, like I was just an obstacle in her way. Nicholas Ryder's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to make Travis seem unstable, questioned why he hadn't gone to police, suggested he'd run away for other reasons, and made up this story. Isn't it true, Ryder asked, that you had behavioral issues in high school? Depression, anxiety? I was a normal teenager. Didn't you see a therapist? For college stress. Lots of kids do. Did your mother ever actually threaten you? Or did you interpret normal parental discipline as threats? Travis's jaw tightened. She told me I was a mistake. She had documents ready to frame me. That's not discipline. That's criminal conspiracy. Or it's the story of a troubled young man who's angry at his mother for having an affair. Objection. Nielsen stood. Counsel is testifying, not asking questions. Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Ryder, ask questions. Ryder tried to shake Travis's story, but couldn't. Travis had lived with this truth for 7 years. He knew every detail, could answer every question, and the evidence backed him up completely. When Travis stepped down, Jeremy met his eyes. Travis looked exhausted but resolute. They'd gotten through the worst. Christy took the stand in her own defense, despite Ryder's visible reluctance. She cried, claimed she'd been manipulated, insisted she never meant to hurt anyone. I love Travis, she said, tears streaming. I would never hurt my son. Yes, I made mistakes. The affair was wrong. But I never threatened him. He ran away because he was angry about the affair, and Carlos convinced me we should stage his death because Travis had threatened to go to the police about things that weren't true. I was scared and stupid, and I went along with it. But I never stopped loving my son. It was a good performance. But the prosecution's rebuttal was better. Mrs. Best, Nielsen said, if you loved your son so much, why did you take out a $750,000 life insurance policy on him 3 months before his supposed death? Carlos suggested it. He said all parents should have insurance on their children. And why? If you were so manipulated by Carlos Rhodes, do your emails show you suggesting specific ways to hide assets, launder money, and avoid detection? I was trying to protect us both. By participating in fraud that killed 2 construction workers, I didn't know about the safety violations. Nielsen presented the emails. Here's one from you to Carlos. The inspectors are asking questions about the Mercer site. I've transferred additional funds to the account we discussed for handling them. You knew. You paid the bribes. You were an active, willing participant. Christie's composure cracked. I was in love. People do stupid things when they're in love. Did you love Carlos Rhodes more than your own son? Of course not. Then why let your son believe he was hunted for 7 years while you lived comfortably with your husband and your lover? Christie had no answer. Chapter 7. The Verdict. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day, Jeremy sat in that courtroom and watched his wife's lies unravel. Every day, the evidence mounted higher. Christie's defense crumbled piece by piece until even Nicholas Ryder looked defeated. Carlos Rhodes's trial ran concurrently, and the 2 cases fed into each other. Prosecutors showed how Christie and Carlos had worked together, planned together, benefited together. They weren't victim and manipulator. They were partners. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Jeremy waited in a conference room at the federal building with Travis and Harvey, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. 7 years of grief, 1 month of investigation, 3 weeks of trial. Everything came down to 12 strangers. On March 29th at 2:47 p.m., the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood. Jeremy held Travis's hand, something he hadn't done since his son was a child. On the count of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of money laundering? Guilty. On the count of wire fraud? Guilty. 7 counts total. Guilty on all of them. Christie's face went white. She swayed in her chair, and Nicholas Ryder had to steady her. Across the courtroom, Carlos Rhodes received identical verdicts. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks out and denied bail pending sentencing. Christie was remanded into custody immediately. As the marshals led her away in handcuffs, Christie turned and looked at Jeremy one last time. Not with rage anymore, with something like disbelief, as if even now she couldn't believe this was happening, that her performance had finally failed. Jeremy watched her disappear through the door and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. Just a vast emptiness where his marriage used to be. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Jeremy read a brief, prepared statement. Justice has been served. My son and I are grateful to the FBI, the prosecutors, and everyone who helped bring the truth to light. We ask for privacy as we rebuild our lives. Reporters shouted questions. Jeremy ignored them, walked to his car with Travis. They drove in silence to the diner on Highway 9, their unofficial headquarters for this entire ordeal. It's really over, Travis said, staring at his untouched coffee. I keep thinking there's going to be another twist, another lie to uncover. It's over, Jeremy confirmed. She's going to prison. So is Carlos. How do you feel? Jeremy considered. How did he feel? The woman he'd loved for 22 years was a stranger who'd caused unimaginable pain. The life he'd built was revealed as a lie. But his son was alive, sitting across from him, safe. I feel like I can breathe again, Jeremy said finally. For 7 years, I've been suffocating under grief that wasn't even real. Now it's just done. What happens now? Do we just go back to normal life? There's no going back, but we can build something new. Together. Travis nodded slowly. I'd like that. I missed you, Dad. Missed having a family. You never stop having a family. I never stopped being your father, even when I thought you were gone. They talked for hours that night, making plans. Travis would move back to the city, find an apartment, enroll in college to finish his degree. Jeremy would keep working, keep their home, rebuild his life one day at a time. They'd have dinner every week, make up for lost time, learn how to be father and son again. When they finally left the diner, it was after midnight. Jeremy hugged Travis goodbye and drove home to an empty house that felt more peaceful than it had in 7 years. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Sentencing day was May 10th. Jeremy and Travis arrived at the courthouse together, walking past the cameras and reporters who'd been following this case for months. It had become a national story, the suburban scandal that revealed hidden darkness in an ordinary marriage. The courtroom was packed again. Families of the construction workers who died sat in the front rows. Marion Shepard was there, recently divorced from Gerald, who'd pled guilty to his own charges. Sean and Abby Williamson were notably absent. Christy was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back, her face bare of makeup. She'd aged 10 years and 6 weeks. Carlos Rhodes followed, equally diminished. The judge, a stern woman named Lydia Eaton, reviewed the case thoroughly before pronouncing sentence. Mrs. Best, Judge Eaton said, "You have been convicted of serious federal crimes. Your actions destroyed your family, endangered public safety, and showed a breathtaking disregard for human life and the law. You faked your own son's death for financial gain. You participated in construction fraud that killed 2 workers. You laundered money and defrauded insurance companies. You showed no remorse until you were caught, and even then your primary concern was avoiding consequences." Christy stood motionless, her lawyer beside her. The prosecution has recommended 15 years. The defense has argued for leniency based on your lack of prior criminal history. I've considered both arguments. However, I've also considered the profound harm you caused to your son, who lived in fear for 7 years, to your husband, who grieved a death that never occurred, to the families of workers who died because of the fraud you facilitated. Judge Eaton paused. I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $1.2 million to cover the insurance fraud, legal costs, and compensation to the workers' families. Christy's legs buckled. Nicholas Ryder had to hold her up. Carlos Rhodes received 25 years for his more extensive role in the construction fraud, money laundering, and the deaths at his sites. As the marshals led them both away, Christy looked back one more time. But not at Jeremy. At Travis, her son, whom she tried to erase, who'd brought about her downfall. Travis met her gaze steadily, his face showing no emotion. Christy opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Then she was gone. Outside, Travis let out a long breath. 18 years. She'll be 61 when she gets out. If she gets out early for good behavior, maybe 58, Jeremy said. Either way, the best years of her life are gone. Is that enough? For what she did? Jeremy looked at his son. Is any sentence enough? She can't give you back 7 years. Can't undo the grief she caused or the people who died. But she'll spend the next 2 decades in prison, knowing her greed and selfishness cost her everything. That's something. Adriana Nielsen approached them. Gentlemen, I wanted to thank you both. Cases this clean are rare. Your documentation and testimony made this possible. What happens to the civil suits? Jeremy asked. The workers' families? We're pursuing assets. The offshore accounts, Christy's share of your home, Carlos's business holdings. It'll take time, but they'll get compensation. Nielsen's expression softened. How are you both doing? One day at a time, Travis said. If you need anything, counseling resources, victim services, let me know. She shook their hands and left. Jeremy and Travis walked to their cars in the parking garage, away from the media circus. Dad, I need to tell you something, Travis said. During the trial, I realized I'm angry, not just at Mom and Carlos, but at everything. 7 years of my life gone. Can't get those back. Can't undo the fear or the loneliness or missing out on everything. That's normal. Maybe. But I don't want to be angry forever. I don't want what she did to define the rest of my life. Jeremy put his hand on Travis's shoulder. Then don't let it. She took 7 years. Don't give her any more. Build the life you want. Be the man you want to be. That's the real revenge. Living well. Travis nodded slowly. I'm going to need therapy. Probably a lot of it. So am I. We'll figure it out together. They stood in the parking garage, father and son, survivors of the same betrayal. Around them, life continued. Cars coming and going, people heading to court dates and meetings and ordinary errands. The world hadn't stopped for their tragedy, and it wouldn't stop for their recovery. But they'd survived. They'd exposed the truth, gotten justice, and found each other again. And that was enough to start rebuilding. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 6 months later, Jeremy stood in the backyard of his house watching Travis help install new patio furniture. His son had moved into an apartment downtown, enrolled in online courses to finish his psychology degree, and started working part-time at a construction firm, legitimate this time, where he used his experience to help ensure safety compliance. You know, Travis said, tightening a bolt, there's a weird irony in me working construction after everything with Carlos. You're making sure what he did doesn't happen again. That's not irony. That's redemption. Travis straightened, wiped sweat from his forehead. Dr. Spence says I'm fixating on fixing things I can't change. Processing trauma by trying to prevent future traumas. Is that bad? Not necessarily, as long as I'm aware of it. Travis grinned. Therapy's weird, Dad. I recommend it. Jeremy smiled. He'd been seeing Dr. Lynn Spence as well, working through his own anger and grief and the complicated feelings about his failed marriage. It helped. Slowly, the doorbell rang. Jeremy went inside to find Seth Willis, the private investigator who'd documented Christie's affair, standing on the porch with a package. This came to my office, Seth said. Addressed to you, but sent to me first. Figured it might be important given everything. Jeremy took the package cautiously. It was from a law firm in Seattle. Inside was a letter from Nicholas Ryder. Mr. Best, this is the most unusual letter I've written in 30 years of practice. My client, Christy Best, has asked me to convey the following message to you. She has authorized me to confirm that these are her words, though I advised against sending this letter. Christy acknowledges the full scope of her actions and their consequences. She does not expect forgiveness and is not asking for it. However, she wanted you to know certain truths that never came out at trial. The affair with Carlos Rhodes began as Christy claimed, but her participation in his criminal enterprise was entirely voluntary. She was not manipulated. She was a willing partner who saw an opportunity for wealth and excitement she felt was lacking in her marriage to you. The decision to fake Travis's death was primarily hers. Carlos wanted to simply pay Travis off or threaten legal action, but Christy pushed for a more permanent solution. She told me, and I quote, I wanted a clean break from that part of my life. Travis knowing about the affair made me feel trapped. Making him disappear solved multiple problems. She maintains she did love Travis when he was young, but grew to resent him as he got older and represented obligations she no longer wanted. She's aware this makes her sound sociopathic. She says she probably is. Regarding you specifically, Christy says the worst part of prison is knowing she gave up a good man for a fantasy. Carlos Rhodes has cut off all contact with her and is cooperating with prosecutors in other cases to reduce his sentence. Meanwhile, you build a case that put her in prison and reclaimed your son. She admits you were smarter than she ever gave you credit for. She wanted me to tell you this because, in her words, Jeremy deserves to know he was never the problem. I was. He built a good life, and I burned it down for no reason except my own selfishness. I hope he and Travis find happiness. They earned it. I include this letter not because Christy deserves any consideration, but because sometimes victims need closure. Do with this information what you will. Respectfully, Nicholas Ryder, ESQ. Jeremy read the letter twice, then carried it outside where Travis was finishing the furniture. Letter from Mom, Jeremy said, handing it to Travis. Travis read it silently, his expression neutral. When he finished, he folded it carefully. I expected her to still be making excuses. Blaming Carlos, blaming circumstances, blaming us. Travis looked at his father. This is almost honest, in a fucked up way. Does it change anything? No. She still did everything she did. But Travis paused, thinking. Dr. Spence talks about how people can be multiple things at once. Mom was a mother who loved me when I was young, and she's a criminal who tried to erase me when I was inconvenient. Both can be true. Complicated. Everything about this is complicated. Travis stood, surveyed their work. But you know what? We're still here. We're having dinner together, planning to watch the game on Sunday, building furniture in our backyard. She's in prison and we're okay. More than okay. Jeremy looked at his son, 27 now, stronger and more confident than he'd been at 19. Travis had survived something that would have broken many people, and he'd come out the other side with purpose and determination. I'm proud of you, Jeremy said. I know I don't say it enough, but I am. What you did, gathering evidence for years, staying strong, coming back, that took incredible courage. I learned it from you, Travis replied. You spent 7 years grieving and never became bitter. When you found out the truth, you didn't fall apart. You built a case. You got justice. You showed me what strength really looks like. They finished the patio furniture as the sun set, then ordered pizza and watched a baseball game. Simple things. Normal things. The kind of father-son evening Jeremy had thought he'd never have again. Later, after Travis left, Jeremy sat on his new patio furniture and looked at the stars. He thought about Christy in prison, about the 22 years of marriage that turned out to be largely fiction, about the grief and anger and eventual acceptance. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Best, this is Melinda Richardson from the FBI. Agent Harvey wanted me to inform you that additional charges have been filed against Carlos Rhodes based on evidence uncovered in your case. 4 more developers have been arrested. Your documentation is helping dismantle a network of construction fraud across 3 states. Thank you for your cooperation and your thoroughness. Jeremy smiled slightly. Even now, the case was bearing fruit. More criminals caught, more victims getting justice. Christy and Carlos's downfall had triggered a cascade effect that would make the construction industry safer. He texted back, glad it's helping. Let me know if you need anything else. Another text came through, this one from Travis. Thanks for today, Dad. Let's do it again soon. Maybe teach me some of that forensic accounting stuff. Might come in handy. Jeremy replied, anytime. Love you, son. Love you too. Jeremy sat on his patio until the stars were fully visible, thinking about redemption and justice and second chances. Christy had stolen 7 years from his son and from him, but they'd taken back control, exposed the truth, and built something new from the wreckage.